I want to welcome you today to this presentation for the Little Flower Children and Family Services of New York. We will have a discussion on LGBTQI+, transgender, education, advocacy, and inclusion. This is brought to you by the Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance and the Adirondack North Country Gender Advocacy and Education. I am Kelly Metzgar. I identify as a non-binary transgender person. I am the co-founder of Adirondack Diversity Initiative here in the Adirondack North Country. We focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for all marginalized communities. Gender Equality New York serves transgender, gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, and intersex communities. They are headquartered down on Long Island. I'm co-founder for Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit, primarily serving Franklin, Essex, and Clinton counties here in the northeast corner of New York State. We were formalized in the spring of 2017. We host a variety of events throughout the year, including Transgender Day of Visibility coming up in March, Tri-Lakes Pride held at the end of June in Saranac Lake, New York, Adirondack North Country Pride at the end of September, first part of October in Plattsburgh, New York, October, of course, being LGBTQ History Month and National Coming Out Day. We also have our Transgender Day of Remembrance commemorance service that is in November. We have adult peer groups that meet every week by Zoom, as well as a youth group that meets in Saranac Lake. I'm founder of Adirondack North Country Gender Advocacy and Education, which, as the name suggests, is the advocacy and training wing of the Gender Alliance. I'm also part of the advisory board for Travel Unity, which focuses on promoting travel and tourism in the United States and elsewhere. We have flown under many flags over the last several years. Our original flag, designed by Gilbert Baker in 1978, actually had 8 stripes, and each stripe had an individual specific meaning. 1 year later, it was revised down to the current 6-color flag that we see most often. In 2017, the people in Philadelphia realized that the Black and Hispanic communities were not well represented within the larger LGBTQ community, so they added the black and brown stripes. 1 year later, the transgender flag was also incorporated into the Pride flag with our white, pink, and blue colors, now with the brown and black for Hispanic and Black communities. More recently, in 2021, the intersex flag was also added into the triangle, that is the yellow triangle with the maroon circle. So this is now our most inclusive flag that the community is currently flying. If you see any one of these flags, just know those are all Pride flags. So let's decode this alphabet soup. I take it out to LGBTQIP2SAA. That's a lot. What do all those letters mean? Well, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual communities have done a wonderful job over the past several decades educating people regarding their specific communities. What's this whole transgender thing? Transgender people, their identity is opposite their sex assigned at birth. We talk about gender authenticity, being true to one's own sense of self, who we know ourselves to be, deep within. Gender identity disorder was the previous diagnosis under DSM-4, but we know that this is not a mental disorder. This is how we were created. The current diagnosis, and we do need a diagnosis for gender-affirming medical care, is gender dysphoria. Dysphoria is a discomfort or a distress, a mismatch between a person's biological sex at birth and their gender identity. The term cisgender, CIS gender, are those people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. Everything is congruent. Cis comes from the Latin to mean on this side of, to be congruent with, to be whole. There is a congruency of mind, body, and spirit. As I said, everything matches. Transgender is an umbrella term used to describe a larger group of people, including those whose sex assigned at birth does not match their gender identity, cross-dressers, people who wear clothing of the opposite sex. Transgender, as we've talked about, may be male to female, female to male. Pre-op are those before gender confirmation surgery. Post-op, obviously, is after that surgery has taken place. Non-op are people who prefer to live in their gender identity without undergoing surgery. Some transgender individuals may not have the desire or the finances to physically change their bodies, but they still want to live full-time on a permanent basis in the identity that is opposite their sex assigned at birth. Transgender people may be in various stages of expressing themselves. Our youth use puberty blockers to delay the onset of the wrong puberty. Adult hormones are 81 milligram aspirins, which act as a blood thinner, especially when the person is on estrogen or progesterone. Spirulactone suppresses testosterone in male to female individuals, while testosterone is used for female to male. Queer, meaning gender queer, gender expansive, gender fluid. Over the past several years, our young people have taken back this term and reinvented it and repurposed it to mean people who identify as gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, agender, gender fluid. Never use the term queer when referring to anyone who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or any of the other letters. But it is an umbrella term that encompasses a wide variety of communities. Questioning is a period or phase where an individual reassesses or questions with uncertainty their sexual orientation or gender identity. Intersex is a variation in sex characteristics, including hormones, gonads, and genitalia, that do not allow an individual to be distinctly identified as either male or female. We often base a person's sex on their chromosomes, XX for female, XY for male, but there is a wide variety of chromosome patterns, XXY, YXX, and so many others. We all have a SRY gene that stands for sex receptor on the Y chromosome. That may not be androgen receptive, testosterone receptive. You may have a person who may have XY chromosomes, but they develop as female. A person's testes or ovaries, gonads, may not be fully or correctly developed. An intersex person may have an elongated clitoris that resembles a small penis, while they still may have a vagina and a uterus. Estimates for intersex people range from 0.05 to 1.7% of the population. And amounts to about 1 in every 1,500 or 2,000 births. When should a child undergo sex reassignment for an intersex condition? It used to be doctors would want to operate very quickly, soon after birth, to correct the appearance of the baby's genitalia. Half the time they got it right, which meant half the time they also got it wrong. And once a child undergoes this type of surgery, it cannot be reversed later. The wisdom today is, rather than rushing into surgery for infants or small children, to let the child grow. Let them make the decision when they are able to make those types of choices for themselves. There's no rush. Pansexual is a sexual attraction, a romantic love, or emotional attraction towards people of any sex, any orientation, or gender identity. It may be referred to themselves as being gender blind. They are attracted to the person for who the person is, regardless of any other labels. Two-spirit is a term reserved for our Native American and Canadian First Nations people, who fulfills one of many different mixed gender roles. They may encompass by the term historically, including wearing clothing and performing the work associated with both men and women. Our Native peoples recognized more than two separate genders. They encompassed both male and female spirits in one physical person. Two-spirit people were thought to be wise. They were honored for the two spirits, male and female, that resided within them. A and A. Asexual, a person who has no sexual feelings, interests, or desires, or who is not physically, sexually attracted to anyone. I always include our allies, because we live in community with many different people who love and support us. They may be our immediate and extended families. They may be our neighbors, friends, or co-workers. Our allies are so very important to who we are every day. So I always want to make sure I include them in our alphabet soup. What is the difference between sex and gender? Or are they the same thing? Certainly, those two terms get interchanged very often. Sex is biologically defined and assigned at birth. As we stated, it may be based on chromosomes, hormones, internal organs, physical appearance, generally thought of as male, female, or intersex, but it may not always be binary and does not have to match gender identity. Gender, on the other hand, is culturally defined. It's how you view yourself and how you see your identity. That can be expressed through clothing, hairstyles, makeup, and other forms of self-expression. It is culturally defined roles or attributes that a person takes on. It is not binary and does not always match a person's sex. So sex and gender are actually two different terms with two different meanings. And I think it's time that we start using the proper term with the proper meaning. Gender identity can be viewed on a spectrum between male and female, man and woman. How do we express ourselves? What are the clothes we wear? How do we style our hair? What are the roles that we have in our society? All of this is somewhere on a continuum, from one end to the other, with many people in the middle. If we think of a standard bell curve that's used in statistics, there's a small population on either side of the curve and a big bulge somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of people who are in the middle, somewhere on that spectrum. We may look at many different ways. If our sex assigned at birth is male, we identify as a man, we would be considered cisgender. If our sex assigned at birth was female and we identify as a woman, again, we would identify as cisgender. Anything else? Maybe transgender, gender non-conforming, gender non-binary, and many other identities somewhere in between. We often use the image of the genderbread person to represent these ideas. We have our identity, what's in our mind, how we see ourselves, who we know ourselves to be, our orientation, who we're attracted to, who we love, who we want to live and be with on an emotional, romantic level. We have our physical sex, boy parts, girl parts, intersect, something in between. And when we tie all of those different identities, all those different components of ourselves together, we have our expression, how we present ourselves to the world. Sometimes we use the image of the gender unicorn. It all represents the same thing, the same concepts. And again, this is all on a spectrum, from one end to the other, with a lot of people somewhere in the middle. So what is gender? Many countries around the world also recognize a third gender. In the US and Canada, we have our Native and First Nation Two-Spirit people. India, Hydras, South Pacific Islands, Fa'afafine, Mexico, Muxes, and there are many different third gender peoples around the world. Ancient Hebrew societies recognized 6 different types of gender. These people are fully part of their culture and their society, and they are recognized for their uniqueness. Many states now recognize an X option when it comes to gender or sex on our official documents. Beginning in spring of 2022, the U.S. federal government will allow non-binary and intersex people to obtain IDs and passwords with an X gender marker instead of the M or F that was previously used. The interim policy also removes the requirement that transgender people provide proof of gender transition in the form of a physician letter. So it allows a much greater diversity of people to self-identify without medical intervention or documentation from a physician. We have what I call the traditional cis-heteronormative gender model. That's a nice, big, fancy term. But what does it mean? Well, let's break it down. Traditional? The way things have normally been. The history of a way of living. Cis, as we talked about, are cisgender. Their sex assigned at birth matches their gender identity. Hetero, heterosexual. Normative, this is normal. This is the way it's supposed to be. Normal people behave in a given manner. The traditional model said that if your sex assigned at birth was male, your gender identity should be that of a man. Your gender role, your function in society should be masculine. Your gender expression, your hair, your style of clothes, your walk, your mannerism, your job should be masculine, and that you should be physically and sexually attracted to a woman. If your sex assigned at birth was female, you should identify as a woman. Your gender role in society should be of a feminine nature, perhaps a school teacher, a librarian, a nurse. Your expression, perhaps long hair, shoulder length hair, makeup, earrings, dresses, heels. Your stay-at-home mom, mother. Your sexual orientation should be that towards a man, a male. Heterosexual. But we know that's not the way life is. We know life is much more complicated. I believe this slide represents a more realistic view of life in the modern age. We know that males may be attracted to other males. Females may be attracted to other females. We know men may have a variety of gender roles, functions in society. We may have male nurses. We may have male teachers. We may have males functioning in formerly traditional female jobs. Same with females. We now have many female doctors, lawyers, those who work in construction, the trades. So our role in society is all intermixed now. There's no job, or very few, that the other cannot perform. And we know the sexual orientation may be whoever the person is attracted to. These are not choices that someone makes. We are born this way. In fetal development, our physical bodies begin to form around week 6 to 8. And we all start out as female initially. Around week 6 to 8, hormones start to shape the physical body of the fetus. If there is an androgen wash of testosterone, the fetus will begin a more traditional male development. The clitoris will elongate, the labia will fuse to become the scrotal sac, the gonads will drop down into that sac to form testes. If that androgen wash does not occur, the fetus continues on a more female development. The labia remain open, the clitoris remains intact, the gonads rise up into the body to become ovaries. That is just normal development. Begins around week 6 to 8. But when does the brain begin to form? And are all areas of the brain forming at the same time? No. Our brain begins to develop in the second and third trimester, and then well after birth. Again, it goes through the same or similar chemical process as the body. If an androgen wash of testosterone occurs, the brain will develop into a more traditional male brain pattern. If that androgen hormonal wash does not occur, the brain will continue in a more female type brain pattern. For most people, the way our bodies are formed matches the way our brains develop. For some of us, it is opposite. transgender people, there is a disconnect between our physical body and how we perceive ourselves, our gender, in our brain. Transgender people may have a typically male body, but a more feminine type brain. And same for trans males who may have developed a female body at birth, but their brain structure is masculine. So since we can't change the body, we have to change the brain. That is the gender dysphoria, the mind-body disconnect. We've often heard people who feel that they have been born into the wrong body. We know that the brain structures of transgender men resemble the brain structures of cisgender men. And we know that the brain structures of transgender women more closely resemble the brain structures of cisgender women. This is more of a biological issue than of a mental health issue. These are not choices that anyone is making. It is how we were created. We do not wish to be anything less than the people we are. We're not looking to be fixed or changed or forced into a lifestyle deemed socially acceptable. And acceptable by whose standards? Conversion therapy, or reparative therapy, was a practice used for many years and is still used in some states across the nation today. It's an attempt to force a person through coercion, deprivation, basically torture, to come back in line with society's expectations of them. If someone identified as gay or lesbian, reparative therapy would strive to make them heterosexual. If someone was transgender, reparative therapy would strive to bring person's mind and body into congruency. But we know that this is how the brain was developed. Again, since you cannot change the brain, the only thing you can do is change the body to match. So what organizations support reparative therapy today? And is it effective? The simple answer is gender affirming care for both adolescents and adults has been endorsed by the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatricians, the American Psychiatric Associations, and many other professionals groups as necessarily and frequently life-saving for the transgender individuals. There is growing evidence that hormone therapy improves the mental health of young trans youth. Irreversible surgeries that we hear about many times from politicians who wail against gender affirming care for our young people. Surgery is rarely, if ever, performed under minors under 18 years of age. These therapies, these guidances, are overseen by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH. And you may find more information on their programs and recommendations and guidances at wpath.org. Reparative therapy was banned in New York State in 2019, although there are many states across the nation today that still allow this to occur. It has been oftentimes disastrous for the person undergoing such a procedure, and often the individual comes out worse than when they entered that reparative therapy program. Many people are suicidal and often end their lives by suicide rather than living in a false identity. Reparative therapy is very dangerous for the young people who have forced to go through it. Being transgender, this brings our mind, our body, and our spirit into one whole, happy, and unified person. We would invite you to join our Adirondack North Country community today. You can follow us on Facebook. Our email address is ancga@outlook.com. As I said, we host a variety of events throughout the year. We would encourage you to come to the North Country, enjoy the beauty of our mountains and lakes. You can certainly also educate yourself on your organization through the many programs offered through Adirondack North Country Gender Advocacy and Education, such as professional trainings that we did just now. Any questions? Please forward those to your diversity, equity, inclusion area, your human resource area, and of course you can email me directly at ancga@outlook.com. I thank you for your time today. I hope you found this presentation interesting and useful. Take care.